Hello and welcome to Nutshell Recaps. This video explains the synopsis of the movie, The Invisible Man. Warning, there will be spoilers, so proceed with caution. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, it will really help our channel grow. Cecilia Cass, a wealthy optics engineer and businessman, wakes up in the middle of the night next to her boyfriend Adrian Griffin in the opening scene. It turns out that Cecilia has been in a violent and domineering relationship for a very long time. When she can take it no more, she ultimately makes the decision to escape his heavily guarded home. To do this, she gives Adrian a dose of diazepam, gets her luggage ready, and leaves the mansion covertly while keeping an eye on him through her phone's CCTV. Adrian is awakened when she unhooks their dog Zeus from his shock collar just before she leaves the property and inadvertently triggers the car's alarm. She consequently leaps off the wall and heads for the roadway. Emily, her younger sister, picks her up there and appears perplexed. A few moments later, an enraged Adrian storms over demanding that the door be opened. Even though he smashes the car window, the sisters are able to escape in time. 2 weeks later, when the scene rewinds, we find that Cecilia has been staying at the house of Detective James Lanier, a childhood acquaintance, and his teenage daughter, Sydney. Cecilia is still withdrawn and afraid to leave the house, despite James' best efforts to keep her safe. She gets startled even by chance meetings, such as a strolling jogger. When Emily pays her a visit one day, Cecilia becomes very anxious because she thinks Adrian may have followed her here and knows where she lives. But Emily says that since Adrian did the unimaginable, she doesn't need to be afraid any longer. Cecilia sits there stunned for a while, taking in the information. At last, she tells Emily and James about Adrian's mistreatment and control over her. She says he desired a child, but she continued taking birth control pills since she knew it would just make her escape impossible. Tom, Adrian's brother and attorney, writes Cecilia a letter the following day. In order to grant his brother's last wish, he calls her into his office. When Cecilia and Emily pay him a visit, Cecilia finds out that Adrian has left her an estate and a wealth of $5 million. With this money, Cecilia expresses her gratitude to James by giving him a new ladder to paint his house and by getting Sydney accepted to her ideal university. Cecilia gets a little nervous at night because she thinks someone is watching and following her. She searches the entire house but doesn't see anyone. We notice someone's breath next to her as she strolls in the bitter cold. Cecilia is seen preparing breakfast in the kitchen first thing in the morning. The hob instantly heats up to the maximum temperature, and the knife moves inexplicably when she briefly steps away, starting a fire. When Cecilia and Sydney notice this, they quickly get a fire extinguisher and put out the flames. These occurrences demonstrate that the dwelling is inhabited by an invisible force. Cecilia is sound asleep next to Sydney in the middle of the night when the cover is slowly peeled off and there are multiple light flashes that appear to be camera flashes. When Cecilia awakens, she tries to get the blanket, but it is immobile. Then, she sees what appear to be footprints slowly approaching her while standing on the blankets. She is so alarmed by this that she shouts aloud, startling Sydney and James. The other two don't notice anything strange, but she insists that there is someone in the room. James then tells her to get some rest because she's just traumatized and worried. Cecilia has a job interview the next day to be considered for an architect position. She tries to show the contents of her professional portfolio there, but her bag is entirely empty. Abruptly, she becomes lightheaded and falls to the floor. After that, she is taken by ambulance to the hospital, where she has blood work. When she gets home, the doctor calls to inform her that she passed out due to excessive diazepam levels in her system. She is horrified to discover in her bathroom the identical bottle of bloody diazepam that she used to sedate Adrian while making her getaway. James and Cecilia go to see Tom because Cecilia feels unsafe. She thinks Adrian staged his death and turned invisible with his knowledge of optics to haunt her. She also talks about a terrifying episode in the past when she was mentally making plans for her escape. To her surprise, though, he kept staring at her and insisted that she had to stay away from him at all costs. Tom rejects her suggestion, nevertheless, since he possesses an urn with Adrian's remains. To further reassure her that Adrian did, in fact, do the unthinkable, he also shows her pictures from the crime site. Following this, Cecilia visits Emily, who is unexpectedly upset with her for sending a rude email from her account. Bewildered, Cecilia maintains that Adrian is handling everything and that she never sent it. Her sister, however, rejects her assertion and closes the door on her. Cecilia had an emotional breakdown when she checks her email at home and sees the message that was received from her account. Sydney enters a little while later and makes an effort to lift her spirits. Sydney is then struck in the face by an invisible force, leading her to believe that Cecilia was the one who did it. The girl calls out for her father, terrified. Although James is furious with Cecilia, he initially chooses to take his daughter outside the house to a safer location. Now that she is by herself at the house, Cecilia attempts a number of strategies to apprehend the invisible person, whom she takes to be Adrian. She stays in the bedroom, waiting for him, and drops coffee grounds on the floor. Soon after, she hears Adrian's cell phone buzzing in the attic and tries to call it. As she ascends, she discovers her job portfolio in Adrian's phone, which contains multiple images of her dozing off. She gets a text message saying surprise at the same moment. She frantically throws a pail of paint down the attic trapdoor, and to her surprise, it covers the phantom person. Returning downstairs, she hears the sound of the kitchen sink running. She heads to investigate and finds the figure has cleaned the paint off. She snatches a knife in self-defense, but before she can get a grip, someone grabs her by the neck and throws her across the room. Despite the brutal fight that follows, Cecilia escapes the house. She hastily hails an Uber and drives to Adrian's estate close to the coast. She heads to the basement to Adrian's research lab as soon as she gets there. Her suspicions are ultimately confirmed when she finds a high-tech bodysuit covered in cameras that has the ability to go invisible. Cecilia grabs this suit and stuffs it in the wardrobe from their old bedroom. She is about to go when she notices two more invisible footprints that are attacking her once more. Their dog steps in shortly after, giving her enough time to escape the scene. After that, Cecilia arranges for Emily and herself to meet in a restaurant, where she apologizes and declares her love for her. As they get to know one another, Emily's mistrust starts to fade, and Cecilia then tells Emily about the invisibility suit at Adrian's lab. At that moment, Cecilia is set up for murder as the invisible man slashes Emily's throat and puts the knife in her hand. After that, a startled Cecilia is taken into custody and placed in a mental health facility. She won't stop screaming that Adrian killed her sister until she is sedated and put into a chair. Following that, Cecilia is put through tests and questioned about her supposed death of Emily. She tries to defend herself, but she falters as she detects Adrian's presence in the space. Cecilia is sent to a mental health facility for trial, where she discovers the startling news that she is expecting. Tom pays her a visit a few days later and promises to have her charges reduced as long as she gives birth to the child and returns to Adrian. Here, it becomes clear that Tom was involved in the whole thing and assisted in staging his brother's demise. He goes on to say that Adrian switched her birth control for something else because he knew she was using birth control, which is how she became pregnant. If she rejects the offer, Tom adds she will forfeit the fortune and be admitted to this facility indefinitely. But Cecilia rejects him since she is still grieving over her sister's passing. She clears the table of Tom's possessions, providing her with an opportunity to pilfer one of his quill pens. Later, in her room, Cecilia gets ready to use the same pen to do the unimaginable, but the invisible man stops her. As it happens, Cecilia uses this as bait and stabs him with a pen. His suit malfunctions as a result, and he appears and disappears at random. A patrolling guard enters at that moment, but the glitching figure stuns him before beating him down. As more guards approach, Cecilia tries to flee, but the unseen guy renders them all helpless before making his getaway into the stormy night. Cecilia confronts him in the parking lot after trailing him there. Rather than defending her unborn child, the invisible presence threatens to harm the people she loves, beginning with Sydney. Cecilia phones James as soon as the figure leaves, alerting him to the risk. She takes a car, too, and drives quickly to his place. Sydney gets attacked by the unseen man as he arrives. Even though James runs to the scene, the person manages to subdue him too. Soon after, Cecilia bursts through the door and uses the fire extinguisher to spray him, exposing his outline. She then fires 4 shots at the figure, killing him in the process. She is startled to discover it's Tom as she takes off his disguise. Meanwhile, Adrian is discovered alive, bound, and saying that Tom held him prisoner when a SWAT squad raids his home. Following these incidents, Tom may have exploited his brother to gain access to Cecilia, as James explains to her based on the facts. She is still certain, though, that Adrian and Tom were collaborators and that Adrian used his brother as a scapegoat for his crimes when things went bad. Cecilia meets Adrian at his house wearing a covert listening device in an attempt to convince him to confess, and James stands by a few blocks away to listen in on their talk. They are seated in front of the surveillance camera at a dining table. She consents to rebuilding their connection, but only if he acknowledges that he was the one who planned the whole thing. Adrian maintains that Tom was at fault and says that this event altered his perspective on life and how he handled her. Adrian says, surprise, at which point Cecilia excuses herself and goes to the loo. Adrian, meantime, is uneasy when he feels his throat being cut and his head being violently snapped back. He consequently falls to the ground and begins to bleed profusely. When Cecilia comes back to the dining table, she seems surprised. She reports what appears to be a self-kill in a panicked voice and contacts the police right away. She taunts Adrian, who is dying, while out of sight of the camera, suggesting that she killed him with the extra bodysuit. After that, she leaves the area, leaving him to perish on the ground. When James hears the disturbance, he dashes in and sees Cecilia, leaving with a bold smile on her face. She claims Adrian did the unimaginable, but she quickly realizes that she was the one who did it after noticing the outfit. James seems to be forced to believe her story and let her go in spite of this insight.